Greetings, programs, and welcome to what is, I guess, emergency rambling video number 2, because, well, my thermal paste still isn't here, basically. So, I'm going to talk about another TV series, and it's not actually one I've watched that recently, but it's one that most of you probably haven't heard of, especially if you're outside the UK. So, no anime this time, which is probably to the relief of everybody. This is a British conspiracy thriller TV series that aired on Channel 4 in 2013 and 2014 because it had 2 seasons, and it's called Utopia. Now, the premise is that a group of random internet strangers, they don't know each other except through this one kind of bulletin board website, get together, and the reason why they all get together is they're all fans of a cult, very strange graphic novel called The Utopia Experiments, which is where the title of the series comes from. And from that point, they very rapidly get drawn into this this conspiracy, or uncovering this very dangerous conspiracy that turns out to be kind of a holdover from the Cold War that then went off in its own direction. And I can't really say too much about it without spoiling especially series 1, because there are some real twists and turns along the way, but I can at least talk a bit about what makes Utopia special. Now, unfortunately, it did only have 2 seasons. They wanted to do a 3rd season, and it looked like HBO was going to pick it up after Channel 4 pulled the plug. The reason why Channel 4 pulled the plug is that despite being critically acclaimed, the viewer numbers were just falling off, and they decided it wasn't worth their while making a 3rd series. So what happened was, it looked like the show creator was going to be able to take it to HBO, and then, I don't know, he couldn't get the assurances that he wanted to make the show how he wanted it, I guess. Because the thing is, Utopia, I mean, in some level it's a standard conspiracy thriller, but there are a lot of differences about it. There's a lot of thematic and especially stylistic differences compared to, I don't even know what to compare it to, like the Da Vinci Code or something. That's a really terrible comparison, but it's the first conspiracy thriller that came to my mind. So it's, for one thing, it's really quite dark, and if any of you have ever read, like for instance, the Preacher graphic novel series, or the Transmetropolitan series. I know those are both, graphic novels or comic series, whatever you want to call them. But it's that kind of level of darkness. Or in Bruges, there's a film example for you. It's the kind of level of darkness that you don't often find in visual media. But it's kind of comic at the same time. There's something very British about the whole thing, that it manages to go to some very, very dark places, but at the same time, it sometimes does that in quite a comedic fashion. And I think In Bruges would actually be a really good example of that, where it's a really dark story if you've never seen In Bruges, but it manages to insert a lot of sort of comic, absurd touches in there along the way. Now, I mentioned that stylistically it's quite different as well. Now, a lot of that is in the cinematography and the direction, although I think it was 2 different people between the first and the second series, but it was not entirely dissimilar in how it was shot. But one of the hallmarks of the series especially was the way they colorized the show. Everything looked very saturated, and it gave it a particularly kind of feverish, slightly nightmarish feel at times. It gave the whole thing a slight air of unreality. Now, what they did, I don't think they just blanket upped the saturation for everything, all the footage that they shot. The skin tones especially, the people on screen don't look like massively florid or anything, but they deliberately went out of their way to, where possible, try and get sets with just a lot of color in. So you'd have like a yellow wheat field, or a completely green corridor, or stuff like that. And then they ramped the saturation levels up of those kind of background colors, and it gives it a really distinct look like nothing else I've ever seen. The very closest I could come to it where anything is played around with color and saturation in the same way is the film, what is it called? A Simple Man, I think, which is a drama film starring that guy. Can't remember, would have to look it up, but anyway, that was the inverse. That actually, for most of that film, they purposely desaturated everything. All the tones were very muted, except at certain moments in the film, they would just ramp up the saturation as a kind of bit of visual punctuation. Now, Utopia doesn't do that. It doesn't sort of play around with the saturation levels at various times, but the fact that it does have that really kind of bright, gaudy, colourful feel about it really does set it apart from most other television. Now, tying in quite nicely with that is the fact that it's also got a really interesting soundtrack. They actually commissioned, now I'm going to look up where he's from exactly, but a guy called, it was something like Cristobal Tapia de Veer, and he's possibly Colombian or Paraguayan, somewhere in South America. Again, I'm going to have to look that up. But it's difficult to encapsulate how different the soundtrack is. Like I can't think of anything else that really compares. It's just so different. And the first and the second series is there's the same composer for both series, but the second series, I think the soundtrack was almost better for the second series, because it's not like he went back to all the themes of the first series. He did something almost different again for the second series, and it really kind of stands out again as being something different. So although apart from the fact that it's a very dark series in places, and the fact that it manages to get this humor in, it's how visually appealing and the way the soundtrack kind of melds with it all that really makes it stand out. And that's not to discount, the actual actors that are in it. It does have a very good cast, especially some of the bad guys are. It's a really complex show in terms of the moralities it displayed. It's not, like the bad guys, as it turns out, are not what some people would call bad guys, even though their methods are horrendous. And there's no arguing the fact that their methods are just awful, and yet the reasons why they do it, and there's a whole kind of like moral grey zone in this show, and some of the arcs of the character arcs of not just the protagonists but the antagonists as well. They go to some really interesting places, even though some of those places are also, again, very, very dark along the way. So, yeah, it's a really, really interesting show. And I just have the feeling that outside of the UK, that probably not a lot of people have heard it. Now, there's good news if you are inside the UK, because last time I checked, it is available as a permanent feature on Channel 4's own video on demand service, which is called All 4. And I think you need to create an account to log in and watch. Although, I can do it on my PlayStation, and basically it just signs in with my PSN credentials. But last I checked, they had both series on there, and you can effectively watch it for free. There are adverts. That's how they, pay for showing these things. But I can't recommend it enough. It is one of the best TV dramas I have seen in the last couple of years, and that's even, standing in the same frame as something like Steins Gate, or a show I wanted to mention actually when I was talking about Steins Gate in anime, a show called Planets, which I did mention to somebody in the comments section, where it's just a very kind of Arthur C. Clarkean feeling space drama. I think it's really like, it's completely trite, but you can say about it that it is not only a romance of space, but it's also a romance in space. So there you go. There's a a randomly dropped in anime recommendation for you if you're a fan of hard sci-fi. There's not a mecha suit or a magic anything or ridiculous space technology in sight. It's all very, very much grounded in present science. But Utopia, back to that. It's. I mean, if you are squeamish at all, and I don't mean in a kind of gore way, but if you're squeamish about, I can't say without, it would be a massive spoiler. There are certain things that occur in this, and actually that occurred around the time of some real life mass shootings in the US, that Channel 4 was actually criticised for putting out a couple of the episodes. One particular episode, they got a lot of complaints to Ofcom because it came out at about the same time as a mass shooting in the US, and it was just one of these things where it's just a massively unfortunate coincidence. But it is dark. I mean, I can't emphasize this enough. It is really, really quite dark, and yet at the same time some of the best television I've seen in a few years. So it's unfortunate that it only got 2 series, but the way they round it off, I mean, after the first series, I think if there hadn't been a second series, it would have felt like it ended on a cliffhanger. But they ended the second series in such a way that it does feel like it's more or less like it feels like an ending, but at the same time it's very much open to there being a continuation, a third series. So it's really disappointing when you get to the end of the second series and you find that there's not going to be a third one. And I was actually really excited when I first learned that there was going to be an HBO continuation, but of course that was then cancelled. So oh well. So anyway, there you go. This is me being further bored, or further sitting around in my boredom and deciding to record another thing. And it's, like I said, it's not a series I've seen. I didn't watch it. I haven't watched it that recently, but it's still enough in my mind like that. It's one of these shows that just makes such a strong impression that I can still talk about it. So I highly recommend it. And also it's Chile. He's a Chilean-born Canadian film composer. There you go, Cristobal Tapia de Veer, it's just one of those names that sticks in the mind. It's an excellent name. So yes, if you have enjoyed this recommendation, or maybe you'll make some counter recommendations of your own as you did in the last video, then you can leave any comments below. You can hit that like button if you've enjoyed this extra slice of rambling, and as always, stay tuned for more.